Hi everyone, I'm Stephen and welcome to Audio Nautica. Today I'm looking at a fairly controversial topic, and that's this question: is vintage hi-fi better? Well, my answer is no, but it can be. Now hang on, hear me out, let me explain. There's an awful lot of vintage hi-fi gear out there for sale, and most of it, in my opinion, is junk. There's people out there buying things because it's got Marantz or because it's got, shiny dials and knobs, and they're basically buying it because they think it looks cool. And an awful lot of that stuff will not sound very good, or if it does sound very good, it won't sound very good for very long because it hasn't been serviced, they bought it at a junk sale, or it was very low end to start with. So it's like any market of used things. There is some used things out there that are very, very good, but most of it is junk. And it's like with a used car. If you went and bought a used car just because it was old, well, you're going to get a clunker, aren't you? And it's the same, in my opinion, with vintage hi-fi gear. If you buy some vintage hi-fi gear just because it's old, then you're probably going to get a piece of junk. So this is why I say, for the most part, that no, vintage hi-fi, generally speaking, does not sound better. However, it can do if you're very discerning about what you buy, which means you've got to do your homework, you've got to do your research. The other reason why I think that for many people vintage hi-fi can be a better option is that if you can find one, then you have all of the models available that have ever been built, theoretically, right? But if you want to buy something that is new, then you've got to find one that is in stock, and you only have the choice of what is currently new. So let's say you had an integrated amplifier that you had your heart set on and you'd been saving up to buy one, then it goes end of life. The manufacturer stops making it. Then what do? You by definition, you cannot buy it new any longer. You might get lucky and find a used one, but yeah, you're quite restricted in what's available. So just to be clear, what I'm talking about here, I'm not talking about used, okay? I am talking about vintage. So the reason why I think vintage hi-fi may be a better option for many people, aside from the broader range of availability, is that by buying vintage, you can often afford to buy something at a higher performance price point than you would be able to purchase new. This is especially the case in high-end audio. You pay astronomical amounts of money for what is true high-end audio, tens and tens of thousands of dollars, perhaps even more. So you can buy something that is vintage, that is high-end audio, and yes, it will be a lot more perhaps than what you could run down to your local, big box shop and buy a competent integrated amplifier for. But the performance level will far surpass anything that you could get around that price point in the new market. So this, for me, is the number one reason why I like vintage hi-fi, is because it means that I can afford to buy things that I would not be able to afford to buy otherwise. And admittedly, I do have a bit of a nostalgia tweak in me as well. I'm a bit of a purist. I do tend to like older things, but not just because they're old, they've got to have the performance there as well. So let's just go through a few examples. I've brought a few things out here from the various systems. Where they normally live is not really conducive to filming them, so I've brought them out here. And let's just go through a few examples. So this is probably a classic example here, the NAD Stereo 3120. This is basically a 3020 which does not have the tone controls and it doesn't have the level meter, but aside from that, it's basically the same as a 3020. And this is very, very affordable, but you would still probably end up paying about the same or similar to what you would pay for its modern equivalent, which is the NAD C316BEE version 2 or Mark II. But nonetheless, this is probably still a good way to get into vintage hi-fi if one was especially interested in vintage hi-fi. But there's plenty of other things out there that will perform much better. And this here is one of them, for example. Okay, this is a power amp, so it's we're not comparing apples with apples here, but the famous Quad 405-2. And again, depending on what part of the world you live in, especially if you live in England where these were made, these are readily available. But with all of these, again, condition is unknown. It may not be working properly. It may have never been serviced in its whole life. It probably hasn't been. So to get the best out of it, you may need to take it to a hi-fi shop and have it refurbished. So that's something that you need to keep in mind. If you don't want to have to worry about whether it's going to need a service, then you buy new, the same as you would with a car. So there's a couple of examples. Here's another example, is the Sony CDP-101. Now, this is probably not, strictly speaking, high-end audio. When you see them on eBay, they're always listed as an audiophile CD player. I'm not sure that that's exactly true. But I did acquire this because of the nostalgia value, this being the first CD player in the world. And it sounds pretty good to me in my system, but I do intend to pick up something at some point that is a bit more higher end. So yeah, CD players, plenty of options out there for CD players as to what you might pick up. But then for, say, something like a home theatre, you're probably not going to want to buy a vintage home theatre receiver, are you? And I didn't. So this one I bought brand new, this Marantz NR1506. It's relatively low end, but it works for me just for watching TV and watching movies. I didn't want to overinvest. It's still a quite nice receiver. So I'm very happy with it. So that's an example of where I did buy new, because for my needs, buying used or buying vintage was just not an option. Now, of course, there are options where you might want to buy something that is vintage-like, but you actually want the security of something that's brand new. And so then we have things like this. This is my Earhart Audio Ella preamp. I purchased this brand new. Or we have something here like this Dynaco ST120 from VTA, Vacuum Tube Audio, and I bought this as a kit. So I built this about 5 years ago. So again, effectively it was new, but not everyone's into building kits. Some people are, some people aren't. Another thing that we look at is DACs, and again, this is really going to depend on your needs. This is my DAC. I purchased this brand new because I wanted flexibility. I wanted to be able to, I needed USB connectivity because my primary source is my laptop. So a vintage DAC wasn't going to work for me. But if you're into a system with, say, a vintage CD player or a vintage transport, and you're only interested in playing CDs at 44.1 kilohertz, then a vintage DAC may be an option for you, but it's not really an option for me. So this NAD C510, well, it's actually a digital preamp, but this was a solution for me. But you can pay an awful lot more than what I paid for this if you want to in terms of new DACs. There's also ones out there that are much cheaper. Turntables is another thing. You've got to be really, really careful with turntables, because there's so many mechanical parts. It's easy to get burnt on a second-hand one, especially if you've not seen it beforehand and you don't know what sort of condition that it's in. So yes, I purchased this turntable brand new, and it was a run-out model, so it was 50% off. So that was a good option for me, is to be able to get it at half price. And then we have things like this Accuphase preamplifier, and for me this is really the example of where vintage audio comes into its own, is that the build quality, the component selection, and the sound quality of this preamplifier is absolutely stellar. I mean, you can just look at the way the thing is built. You just look at the quality of everything about it. It is just incredible. So yes, even used, this is going to be fairly expensive. But to buy something like this new, you would need to pay an awful lot of money. And the same goes, for example, for my Sansui AU-X11 integrated receiver. Yes, I purchased this from a dealer out of Japan, but to get an equivalent, say an equivalent Yamaha integrated to compete with this, you'd have to spend probably over 10,000 Australian dollars. So that's way out of my budget. Even though this wasn't cheap either, it's really given me an integrated that is an amazing and a stellar performer. So those are just a few examples of what the art of the possible is with vintage hi-fi. I have not spoken about speakers yet. I didn't bring any speakers out here to film, but I should speak briefly about speakers. Look, I do think that speakers is one of those areas where, again, if you're careful, if you are discerning, you can pick up an amazing vintage speaker. And I do have some vintage speakers and I really like them. I think especially again with high-end speakers, the rule holds true that the kind of money that you would need to spend to buy a new pair of high-end speakers. So here's an example. The JBL L100 was re-released a few years ago. Now that is a legendary speaker, and it retails here in Australia, I think it retails for about $11,500 or something like that. So that is an awful lot of money for a pair of speakers, and I couldn't see myself spending that sort of money on a pair of speakers. But I have got a pair of JBL 4333As, well actually 4331As, but I upgraded them to 3-ways, which makes them 4333As, studio monitors. So they're kind of like the big brother of the L100, if you like. And they cost me far, far, far less than running down to the hi-fi shop and buying a brand new pair of L100s. So again, that's an example of what is available if you're prepared to bide your time, do your research, know what it is that you're looking for, know what it is that you are trying to achieve, and wait for the right moment to come along. So I'm still waiting. It hasn't happened yet, but I am still waiting for a true high-end amplifier to come along. But basically what I did is I kind of like, I guess, just doing a heap of research and, you know, watching YouTube videos and just seeing what it was that resonated with me and what I liked, is I made a list. I made a list of particular things that I wanted to pick up. The NAD 405-2 was on that list. The CDP 101 was on that list. The Sansui AU-X11 was on that list. And so when the opportunity came along to pick one of those up, I took the opportunity. Because I'd already done my homework, it's no use trying to do your homework in the moment. So Power Amp hasn't come up yet, but it will eventually. I'm not in a rush. So that's perfectly fine by me, because I know that when it does come along, it will be the right unit for me and there won't be any regrets. So I hope that this has helped to explain to you some of the whys and the wherefores of vintage hi-fi, and why it is that I think this is why, in my opinion, vintage hi-fi is, generally speaking, not better than new hi-fi, but it certainly can be. And when you pick the right piece of vintage hi-fi, it can be absolutely stellar. Thank you so much for watching my video. If you want to support this kind of content, you can support me over at Patreon. Please subscribe to my channel, give me a thumbs up, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Bye for now.